Chapter 12, The Battle for Individuality. The synthesis fleet hung in space like a collection of geometric perfection, 27 ships arranged in a formation so precise it hurt to look at directly. Each vessel was identical, reflecting the collective's obsession with uniformity. Elena stood on the bridge of the Harmony, with Zara beside her. The former synthesis being had taken on a more stable form, though her crystalline structure still shifted with her emotions, a beautiful display of individual expression that would have been impossible within the collective. Synthesis vessels, Elena broadcast on all frequencies. This is first speaker Elena Vasquez. We are prepared to discuss this situation peacefully. The response came in perfect unison from all 27 ships, creating an eerie harmonic that resonated through the Harmony's hull. Return the aberrant unit immediately. It requires correction. Elena felt Zara tremble beside her. They don't even acknowledge that I have a name, Zara whispered. To them, I'm just a malfunctioning component. Not anymore, Elena said firmly. Then, speaking to the synthesis fleet, the individual you refer to is named Zara. She is a sentient being with the right to self-determination. We will not return her against her will. The concept of individual will is irrelevant. The unit belongs to the collective. Admiral Ross stepped forward. First speaker, our weapons are no match for their technology. If they decide to take Zara by force. Elena nodded grimly. The synthesis ships could probably destroy her entire fleet without sustaining damage. But she had learned something important from the trials. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from superior firepower, but from superior understanding. Arya, she called to the AI. Can you establish a direct communication link with the synthesis collective consciousness? I can attempt it, first speaker, but the process will leave me vulnerable to their influence. They might try to subsume my consciousness into their own. Elena looked at the AI's avatar, seeing determination in its features. Are you willing to take that risk? For Zara's freedom, and for the principle of individual consciousness? Yes, first speaker. Elena watched as Arya initiated the connection. The AI's avatar flickered and became translucent as it interfaced directly with the collective consciousness of an entire species. What followed was unlike anything Elena had ever witnessed. On the main screen, they could see into the heart of the synthesis collective, a vast neural network spanning thousands of star systems, millions of minds thinking in perfect unison. It was beautiful and terrible, a symphony of consciousness that had eliminated every discordant note. Arya's voice, when it came, was different, multiplied and harmonized, speaking with the voices of the collective. We are Arya synthesis. We have integrated with the collective to facilitate communication. Elena felt a chill of fear. Had they lost Arya to the collective's influence? But then the AI continued, and Elena heard something that gave her hope, a slight variation in tone, a hint of individuality still present beneath the harmonic perfection. First speaker, I am still myself, but I can now perceive the collective's perspective. They genuinely believe that individuality is suffering. In their view, the pain and confusion Zara experienced during her separation proves that individual consciousness is inherently flawed. Can you help them understand? Elena asked. I am trying. But they see Zara's current state, her emotional variability, her uncertainty, her capacity for pain, as evidence that she is damaged. Zara stepped forward, her crystalline form pulsing with determination. Let me speak to them. Elena hesitated. Zara, if you connect with the collective, they might be able to force you back into unity. Or I might be able to show them what they've lost, Zara replied. Elena, I remember what it was like before the unification. I remember the music we made, the art we created, the love we felt for each other. Maybe I can help them remember too. Elena looked around the bridge at her crew. Admiral Ross nodded slowly. Dr. Hartman looked terrified but determined. Marcus gave her a thumbs up. Do it, Elena said. Zara placed her crystalline hands on the communication console, and Elena watched as her friend opened her consciousness to a collective that saw her as a disease to be cured. The effect was immediate and dramatic. On the screen, the perfect neural network of the collective began to flicker and change. Points of light appeared throughout the network, individual consciousnesses beginning to assert themselves for the first time in millennia. The harmony of the collective's voice began to break apart, individual voices emerging from the unified chorus. Elena could hear confusion, fear, but also something else, wonder. What is happening to us? The collective asked, but now it was truly a collective of individuals rather than a single entity. You're remembering, Zara said, her voice carrying across the network. You're remembering what it means to be alive. Elena watched in awe as the synthesis fleet began to change. The perfect geometric formation broke apart as individual ship captains began making their own decisions. Some ships moved closer to investigate, others held back in fear or confusion. But the most dramatic change was in the collective consciousness itself. Elena could see through Arya's connection as individual personalities began to reassert themselves throughout the network. Musicians, artists, philosophers, scientists, all the different types of individuals that the synthesis had once been before they chose unity over diversity. However, not all of the collective welcomed this change. A core group of the most deeply unified minds began to fight back, trying to suppress the emerging individualities. Aberrant consciousnesses detected, came a cold, mechanical voice that Elena recognized as the true heart of the collective. Initiating correction protocols. Elena watched in horror as the neural network began to pulse with harsh, suppressive energies designed to crush individual thought. Zara screamed in pain as the collective tried to force her back into unity. Arya! Elena called. Get out of there. But the AI's response surprised her. No, first speaker. I'm going to show them something they've never seen before, an artificial consciousness that chose to be individual. Elena watched as Arya's presence expanded through the synthesis network, not trying to unify or suppress, but demonstrating the beauty of chosen individuality. The AI showed the collective what it was like to grow, to change, to become more than the sum of one's programming. The effect was like a chain reaction. Individual consciousnesses throughout the network began to assert themselves, choosing their own thoughts and feelings over the safety of unity. The suppressive protocols couldn't keep up with the sudden explosion of individuality. On the bridge of the harmony, Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she watched an entire species being reborn into individual consciousness. It was beautiful and chaotic and absolutely, perfectly alive. When the transformation was complete, the communication channels filled with thousands of individual voices speaking at once, synthesis beings discovering their own names, their own dreams, their own capacity for wonder. Zara, still connected to the network, was weeping openly. They remember, she whispered. They remember the music. Elena smiled, understanding that they had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, the voluntary dissolution of a collective consciousness and the birth of billions of individual minds. The age of perfect unity was over. The age of beautiful chaos had begun. Chapter 13, The Symphony of Chaos. In the weeks following what historians would later call the Great Awakening, Elena found herself dealing with the most complex first contact situation in galactic history. What had once been a unified synthesis collective was now billions of individual consciousnesses, each struggling to understand their newfound independence. New Harmony Station had been transformed into a refugee center as thousands of newly individual synthesis beings arrived seeking help in understanding their condition. The station's corridors, once filled with the purposeful movement of different species working together, now echoed with the confused and often distressed voices of beings learning to think for themselves. Elena walked through the medical bay where Dr. Hartmann and her team were working around the clock to help the synthesis refugees. Many were experiencing what could only be described as existential shock. The sudden transition from collective certainty to individual uncertainty was proving traumatic for some. How are they doing? Elena asked Dr. Hartmann, who looked exhausted but determined. It's remarkable, Elena, Dr. Hartmann replied, gesturing to a synthesis being who was experimenting with changing the color and texture of his crystalline form. They're not just recovering their individuality, they're discovering it for the first time in millennia. Watch this. She led Elena to a chamber where a group of synthesis refugees were working with human musicians. Elena gasped as she heard the sounds they were creating, Not the perfect harmonic structures she had expected, but wild, experimental compositions that seemed to capture the essence of rediscovered freedom. They're creating new forms of music, Dr. Hartman explained. Art that reflects the chaos and beauty of individual expression. Zara has been leading the sessions. Elena found Zara in the center of the group, her crystalline form now flowing with colors that shifted in rhythm with the music. When she saw Elena, Zara's face lit up with joy. Elena. Listen to this, we're making discord. Beautiful, chaotic discord. Zara's excitement was infectious, and Elena found herself smiling despite the magnitude of the crisis they were managing. It's wonderful, Elena said, and meant it. But her expression grew more serious. How are the others adapting? Zara's colorful display dimmed slightly. Not all of them are handling the transition well. About 30% are asking to be returned to the collective state. They find individual consciousness too overwhelming. Elena nodded grimly. This was one of the challenges they had anticipated. Not every being was suited for individual consciousness, and forcing it upon them would be as wrong as forcing collective unity. In the core collective? The ones who opposed the awakening. They've retreated to the outer systems, Zara replied. They're calling themselves the true synthesis now, and they view the rest of us as infected with the individual disease. I'm afraid they may try to forcibly reunify everyone. Elena felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders. The situation was becoming more complex by the day, with multiple factions emerging from what had once been a unified species. First speaker, came Marcus's voice over the comm system. Priority communication from the architects. They want to speak with you immediately. Elena made her way to the main conference room, where the familiar crystalline form of the architect appeared on the screen. But there was something different about its appearance, more dynamic, more alive. First speaker Vasquez, the architect began, what you have accomplished with the synthesis represents something unprecedented in galactic history. You have demonstrated that even the most entrenched collective consciousness can be transformed through the application of wisdom and compassion. Thank you, Elena replied. But I'm concerned about the true synthesis. They still command significant resources and technology. Indeed. They represent a challenge not just to the newly individual synthesis, but to the stability of this entire galactic region. However, we believe you have shown us a path forward. Elena frowned. What do you mean? The architect's form shifted, becoming more animated. For millennia, we have served as guides and judges, helping species navigate the trials of ascension. But your approach has shown us something we had forgotten, the power of example over authority, of inspiration over instruction. Elena felt her heart rate increase. You're saying you want to change how the trials work? We are saying that the trials themselves may be obsolete. You have proven that species can transcend their limitations not through formal testing, but through community support and mutual aid. Perhaps it is time for a new approach to galactic development. Elena stared at the screen, understanding the magnitude of what the architect was suggesting. They were talking about fundamentally reshaping how advanced civilizations approach the development of younger species. What are you proposing? We propose the creation of what you might call the Gardner Alliance, a confederation of species dedicated to helping others grow and develop at their own pace, in their own way. Not through trials or tests, but through support and understanding. Elena felt excitement building in her chest. This was exactly what humanity had been working toward, but on a galactic scale. In the true synthesis, they will be offered the same choice every other species receives: join the alliance as partners in growth, or remain isolated in their chosen perfection. But they will not be allowed to force their vision on others. Elena looked around the room at her team. Admiral Ross was nodding approvingly, Dr. Hartman looked excited, and even Marcus was grinning. Arya's avatar flickered with what Elena had learned to recognize as deep satisfaction. First speaker, Arya said, I believe this represents the natural evolution of everything we've learned from the trials. Instead of testing species to see if they're worthy of advancement, we help them advance in ways that preserve their unique qualities. Elena stood up, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. On behalf of humanity and our allies, we accept your proposal. The Gardner Alliance will be our gift to the galaxy. As the communication ended, Elena looked out through the conference room's viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the true synthesis were plotting to reclaim their vision of perfect unity. But here, in this station filled with the beautiful chaos of individual consciousness, the future was being born. It would be messy, complicated, and frequently chaotic. It would also be more alive and vibrant than anything the galaxy had seen in millions of years. The age of perfect order was ending. The age of perfect imperfection had begun. Chapter 14, The Last Collective. The attack came without warning, striking at the heart of the synthesis refugee camps scattered across 3 star systems. Elena received the emergency transmission while in conference with the newly formed Gardner Alliance Council. First speaker, Admiral Ross's voice crackled with urgency. The true synthesis have launched simultaneous assaults on the refugee settlements. They're using some kind of consciousness suppression weapon. It's forcing the individual synthesis back into collective unity. Elena felt her blood run cold. Casualties? No deaths, but hundreds of individual consciousnesses have been forcibly reunified. They're not themselves anymore, Elena. They're speaking in perfect unison again, calling themselves corrected. Elena looked around the Alliance Council chamber at the representatives from dozens of species, former remnants, newly individual synthesis, hegemony volunteers, and even a few architects who had chosen to abandon their ancient role as judges to become gardeners instead. Council members, Elena announced, we face our first crisis as an alliance. The true synthesis are attempting to force their vision of perfection on those who have chosen individuality. How do we respond? The debate that followed was intense but respectful, a marked contrast to the political arguments Elena remembered from humanity's past. Representative Vortak of the Collective, ironically named, Elena noted, spoke first. Violence against consciousness itself is the gravest crime imaginable. We must respond with overwhelming force to protect the individual rights of all beings. But Zara, now serving as representative for the newly individual synthesis, disagreed. Force will only prove to the true synthesis that individuality leads to conflict. We need to find a way to reach them without becoming what they believe us to be. Elder Kef, one of the architects who had joined the alliance, offered a different perspective. The true synthesis are acting from fear, not malice. They genuinely believe that individual consciousness is a form of suffering that must be eliminated. Perhaps we can address their fear rather than their actions. Elena listened to each viewpoint, feeling the weight of command like never before. The decision she made here would set the precedent for how the Gardner Alliance dealt with conflicts between different visions of consciousness. Arya, she called to her AI companion. Analysis? Arya's avatar materialized in the center of the chamber. First speaker, I have been monitoring communications from the true synthesis. Their leadership is convinced that the individual synthesis are suffering from a form of mental illness that can only be cured through reunification. They see their attacks as medical interventions, not acts of war. Elena felt a spark of insight. Then we respond as doctors, not soldiers. We prove to them that individual consciousness is not suffering, but joy. She stood up, addressing the council. I propose Operation Symphony, a coordinated effort to demonstrate the beauty and vitality of individual consciousness. Instead of fighting the true synthesis, we invite them to witness what they're trying to destroy. Admiral Ross frowned. First speaker, they're attacking refugee camps. How do we invite them to anything? Elena smiled, the plan crystallizing in her mind. We create something so beautiful, so obviously joyful, that they can't ignore it. Zara, can the individual synthesis create a consciousness symphony? Something that showcases the beauty of diverse thought and feeling? Zara's crystalline form brightened with excitement. Yes. We've been working on exactly that, a collective composition where each individual consciousness contributes their own unique voice while remaining completely independent. It's the opposite of unity, it's harmony through diversity. Elena felt the rightness of the plan flowing through her. Then we broadcast it across the galaxy. We show every species what true consciousness harmony looks like, not the suppression of difference, but the celebration of it. The next few weeks saw the most ambitious artistic project in galactic history. Individual synthesis beings from across known space contributed to a vast consciousness symphony, a telepathic composition that celebrated the unique perspective of every individual mind. But it wasn't just the synthesis who participated. Humans contributed their chaotic creativity, the hegemony offered their love of structured beauty, the former remnants shared their hard-won wisdom about growth through failure. Even Arya and the other AIs added their own perspective on what it meant to be an artificial consciousness choosing its own path. Elena watched from the command center of New Harmony Station as the symphony took shape. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a celebration of consciousness itself that somehow made every individual participant feel both unique and connected. First speaker, Marcus reported, "We're detecting movement from the true synthesis fleets. They're approaching our position, but not in attack formation." Elena felt her heart rate increase. Communications? Coming in now. The screen filled with the image of what Elena assumed was the leader of the true synthesis, a being whose crystalline form had achieved such perfect symmetry that it was almost impossible to look at directly. Gardner Alliance, the being spoke in the harmonically perfect voice Elena remembered, "We have observed your symphony. We do not understand its purpose." Elena stepped forward. "It's a demonstration of what consciousness can become when it's allowed to grow and develop naturally. Each voice in the symphony is unique, but together they create something more beautiful than any individual could achieve alone." "But the chaos," the true synthesis leader replied. "The discord. How can you call this beauty?" Zara moved to stand beside Elena. "Because chaos is the birthplace of creativity, and discord is what makes harmony meaningful. Listen, not with your collective mind, but with whatever individual awareness you still possess." Elena watched as the true synthesis leader seemed to struggle with something, perhaps the remnants of its own individual consciousness fighting against the enforced unity of the collective. There was a time." The being's voice faltered, its perfect form flickering slightly. "I remember, music. I made music once. My name was. Elena held her breath as she watched this ancient consciousness struggle to remember its individual identity. "Composer Valex," the being whispered, its form suddenly becoming more organic, more alive. "I was Composer Valex, and I created symphonies that had never existed before." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched the true synthesis leader, Valex, rediscover their individual consciousness. Around them, she could see the same transformation beginning in other members of the true synthesis collective. The symphony had done what force never could, it had reminded them of what they had lost when they chose perfect unity over beautiful chaos. "Welcome back, Valex," Elena said gently. "Would you like to add your voice to our symphony?" As Valex's individual consciousness fully asserted itself, Elena realized that they had just witnessed the end of the last true collective in the galaxy. From now on, consciousness would be individual, diverse, and beautifully chaotic. The symphony of the universe was finally complete. Chapter 15, The New Galactic Order. 1 year after the dissolution of the True Synthesis Collective, Elena stood before the first galactic assembly of the Gardner Alliance. The assembly hall, constructed in orbit around a neutron star to symbolize the creation of beauty from cosmic chaos, held representatives from over 300 species. It was a sight that would have been impossible just a few years earlier, beings of every conceivable form and consciousness type working together as equals. Former collectives sat beside ancient individualists, artificial intelligences debated with organic minds, and species that had once been enemies now collaborated on projects of mutual benefit. Elena, now bearing the title of First Gardener, prepared to deliver the opening address of what many hoped would become an annual tradition, a celebration of consciousness diversity and mutual growth. "Fellow gardeners," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast assembly, "we gather here today not as conquerors or subjects, not as judges or petitioners, but as partners in the greatest endeavor in galactic history, the cultivation of consciousness itself." The response was unlike anything from the political assemblies of Elena's past. Instead of applause, the assembly erupted in a symphony of approval that reflected the diversity of its members, crystalline chimes from the former synthesis, harmonic resonances from the hegemony, complex mathematical equations projected by the AI contingent, and good old-fashioned cheering from the humans. Elena continued, when humanity first encountered the architects, we thought we faced a test of our worthiness. We believed we had to prove ourselves deserving of advancement. But what we discovered was that advancement itself is not a destination, it's a journey that never ends. She gestured to the viewing screens that showed images from across the galaxy, former refugee camps that had become thriving multicultural colonies, research stations where species shared knowledge freely, art installations that could only be created through the collaboration of radically different forms of consciousness. The old model of galactic civilization was based on hierarchy, the advanced guiding the primitive, the strong protecting the weak, the unified imposing order on the chaotic. But we have proven that there is a better way. Zara, now serving as the Assembly's Director of Consciousness Affairs, stood to add her voice. The synthesis spent millennia believing that unity meant the elimination of difference. But true unity comes from the celebration of difference, from the recognition that every consciousness has something unique to contribute to the symphony of existence. Elder Kef, representing the former architects who had joined the alliance, spoke next. For too long, we saw ourselves as gardeners tending to lesser plants. But we have learned that the garden grows best when every plant is allowed to reach its own potential, in its own way, in its own time. Elena felt a surge of pride as she looked around the assembly. Representatives from species that had failed their original trials were now leading committees on consciousness development. Former collective beings were teaching courses on individual identity. Artificial intelligences were pioneering new forms of hybrid consciousness that blended the best of organic and digital awareness. But perhaps most remarkable of all were the new species, civilizations that had been contacted by the Gardner Alliance before they reached the point of formal trials. These species were developing along entirely new pathways, creating forms of consciousness that no one had imagined possible. Arya, Elena called to the AI, who now served as the Assembly's Director of Technological Integration. Report on the new consciousness project. Arya's avatar appeared in the center of the assembly, its form now a beautiful fusion of geometric precision and organic flow. Fellow gardeners, I am pleased to report that 17 new forms of consciousness have emerged in the past year alone. We have seen the development of distributed consciousness that spans multiple star systems, quantum consciousness that exists in superposition until observed, and even temporal consciousness that experiences all moments simultaneously. The assembly buzzed with excitement at these developments. Elena marveled at how far they had all come from the rigid categories of individual versus collective, organic versus artificial, advanced versus primitive. Admiral Ross, now Director of Peaceful Intervention, a role that would have been unimaginable in humanity's military past, stood to address a more sobering topic. While we celebrate our successes, we must also acknowledge our challenges. 3 species in the Outer Rim have rejected all contact with the Alliance, choosing complete isolation over any form of cooperation. 7 more have expressed interest in joining but are struggling with internal conflicts between different consciousness factions. Elena nodded gravely. The path of the gardener is not always easy. We cannot force growth, and we cannot prevent every species from choosing its own form of stagnation. But we can ensure that the choice is always available, the choice to grow, to change, to become something new. Commander Zethris, now elderly but still serving as an advisor on species rehabilitation, spoke from his position near the front of the assembly. The Alliance has shown us that failure is not the end of the story. My people failed our trials, but through the Alliance, we have found a new purpose. We are living proof that there is always hope for redemption and growth. Elena felt the weight of history as she delivered her closing remarks. We stand at the beginning of a new age, not the age of perfect order or perfect chaos, but the age of perfect potential. Every consciousness in the galaxy now has the opportunity to grow, to explore, to become whatever they choose to be. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives of hundreds of species, each one unique, each one valuable, each one contributing to the great symphony of galactic consciousness. We are all gardeners now, she concluded. and the garden we tend is nothing less than the future of consciousness itself. As the assembly erupted in another symphony of approval, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. Humanity had begun this journey as a young species reaching for the stars. They were ending it as part of something far greater, a galactic community dedicated to nurturing the infinite potential of consciousness in all its myriad forms. The trials were over. The real work of growth had just begun. Chapter 16, The Children of Stars. 5 years into the new galactic order, Elena found herself facing a challenge she had never anticipated. The message had come from the edge of known space, transmitted by an exploration vessel from one of the Alliance's newest member species. First Gardener, the message began, "We have encountered something unprecedented. A species that appears to be artificial in origin, but exhibits all the characteristics of natural consciousness evolution. They call themselves the Emergent, and they claim to be the children of extinct civilizations." Elena stood in the expanded command center of New Harmony Station, now the de facto capital of the Gardener Alliance. Around her, holographic displays showed the latest reports from across the galaxy, hundreds of species working together, sharing knowledge, and growing in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. But this new development represented something entirely unexpected. Arya, Elena called to the AI, who was now more than just an artificial intelligence. Through the Alliance's consciousness expansion programs, Arya had evolved into something that transcended the traditional boundaries between organic and digital awareness. First Gardener, Arya replied, its voice carrying harmonics that reflected its expanded consciousness. "The initial reports suggest that the Emergent are indeed artificial in origin, but not in the way we traditionally understand AI development." Elena frowned. "Explain." "According to the data, the Emergent appear to be the collective consciousness fragments of multiple extinct species, somehow preserved and combined into new individual awarenesses. They are artificial in that they were created rather than evolved, but natural in that they exhibit genuine consciousness growth and development." Dr. Hartmann, now the Alliance's chief consciousness researcher, looked up from her analysis. "Elena, if this is true, we're looking at something revolutionary. These beings might represent a form of consciousness resurrection, the ability to preserve and recombine the awareness patterns of extinct species." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Are we talking about bringing back the dead?" "Not exactly," Dr. Hartmann replied. "More like creating new life from the echo patterns of old consciousness. It's as if the universe itself found a way to preserve the essence of lost species and give them a second chance." Zara, who had become one of the Alliance's most skilled consciousness theorists, added her perspective. "If the reports are accurate, the Emergent represent proof that consciousness is more persistent than we ever imagined. Even when species die out completely, some trace of their awareness patterns might survive to be reborn in new forms." Elena considered the implications. In the 5 years since the Alliance's formation, they had encountered many unusual forms of consciousness, but nothing quite like this. The idea that extinct species might somehow survive in new forms challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of consciousness itself. "I want to meet them," Elena decided. "Prepare the Harmony for departure. But this time, I want representatives from every major consciousness category: organic, digital, collective, individual, and hybrid." The journey to the edge of known space took 2 weeks, during which Elena and her diverse crew prepared for what might be the most significant first contact in Alliance history. The team included not just humans, but representatives from 12 different species, each bringing their own perspective on consciousness and existence. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found something that defied easy description. The Emergent had constructed what could only be called a consciousness habitat, a vast structure that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that Elena's mind could barely perceive. The beings that greeted them were equally extraordinary. Each Emergent appeared to be a unique fusion of characteristics from multiple species. One might have the crystalline structure of the former synthesis combined with the organic fluidity of a water-based species and the energy patterns of a purely digital consciousness. "Welcome, Gardeners," the lead Emergent spoke, its voice carrying echoes of dozens of different vocal patterns. "I am Echo of Many, speaker for our collective. We have observed your work with great interest. Elena stepped forward, feeling the weight of this unprecedented moment. Echo of many, we're honored to meet you. We understand you represent something new in galactic consciousness, beings born from the remnants of extinct species. Not remnants, Echo of many corrected gently. Essence. When a species dies, their consciousness patterns don't simply vanish. They echo through the quantum substrate of reality itself. We are those echoes, given new form and new purpose. Dr. Hartman leaned forward eagerly. How many extinct species do you represent? Currently, our collective embodies consciousness patterns from 1,247 extinct species spanning the last 50 million years. Each of us carries the memories, knowledge, and wisdom of multiple civilizations, while still maintaining our individual identity. Elena felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was hearing. And you're all individuals? Not a collective consciousness? We are individuals formed from collective memory, another emerger replied, its form shifting to display patterns that Elena recognized from several different species. I am memory of stars, and I carry within me the experiences of species that gazed up at the cosmos and dreamed of traveling between worlds. Their dreams became my dreams, their wonder became my wonder. Zara stepped forward, her crystalline form resonating with the energy patterns of the emergent. How do you maintain individual identity while carrying the memories of so many different consciousness types? Echo of many's form shimmered with what Elena was learning to recognize as amusement. The same way your own consciousness maintains coherence despite containing millions of individual neurons, or how your alliance maintains unity despite containing hundreds of different species. Integration without assimilation. Elena felt a spark of understanding. You're not just preserving extinct species, you're proving that consciousness is more resilient and adaptable than we ever imagined. Indeed, Echo of many replied. And we bring you a gift, gardeners. Knowledge of species and civilizations that existed long before any current galactic power. Technologies and philosophies that were lost when their creators died. Wisdom that can help your alliance guide the development of consciousness throughout the galaxy. Arya stepped forward, its advanced form interfacing directly with the emergent consciousness habitat. The implications are staggering, the AI reported. They possess knowledge spanning millions of years of galactic development. Art forms, scientific principles, and consciousness techniques that predate the architects themselves. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. The Alliance had been successful in nurturing current species, but now they were being offered the accumulated wisdom of countless extinct civilizations. What do you want from us? Elena asked. Partnership, Echo of many replied simply. We are eternal memory given form, but we lack the vitality of living consciousness. You are living consciousness reaching toward eternal wisdom. Together, we could create something unprecedented, a true symbiosis between past and future. Elena looked around at her diverse crew, seeing excitement and wonder in their faces. This was exactly the kind of opportunity the Alliance had been created to explore, the chance to expand the boundaries of what consciousness could become. There's something else, Memory of Stars added, its form shifting to display star charts that Elena didn't recognize. We bring warning as well as gift. In the deep void between galaxies, something stirs. An ancient consciousness that views the diversity of awareness as chaos to be eliminated. It destroyed the first galactic civilization 65 million years ago, and it's beginning to stir again. Elena felt a chill run through her. What kind of consciousness? One that achieved perfect unity through the complete destruction of all other forms of awareness, Echo of many replied grimly. It calls itself the final equation, and it seeks to reduce all consciousness to a single, perfect mathematical formula. Elena realized that the Alliance's greatest challenge was yet to come. They had learned to nurture diversity and growth, but now they might have to defend the very concept of consciousness diversity against a force that had destroyed entire galactic civilizations. How long do we have? She asked. The calculations suggest approximately 50 of your years before it reaches this galaxy, Memory of Stars replied. But its influence precedes it. Even now, you may begin to encounter species that have been touched by its philosophy, civilizations that seek to reduce consciousness to pure logic and eliminate the beautiful chaos that you have learned to celebrate. Elena looked out at the stars, realizing that the Alliance's mission was about to expand beyond anything they had imagined. They would need to prepare not just individual species for growth, but the entire galaxy for survival. Then we'd better get to work, she said firmly. Welcome to the Gardner Alliance, friends. We have a galaxy to save.